I'm super excited as well to welcome you today to the Making It Real podcast. Ariel, we've met each other at different times as well. Ariel is one of the core pioneers in the internet space. He built one of the first web analytics companies. He had the founders of Yahoo, David Filo and Jerry Jang, working for him. I think it was for $25 an hour.
Yeah,
You have to tell us how you
that's true.
negotiated that deal and how all of that came about. And as well, you were on the board of Odeo, that became then known as Twitter, and many StumbleUpon, for example, board member investor. You as well, one of the overall most prolific investors in the Silicon Valley, in the San Francisco and beyond. So I think there's so much to learn from you. You're a passionate kite surfer as well in terms of lifestyle. That's exciting too. But maybe if you take us back to the early days for you, what was it that brought you into the internet space to become an entrepreneur, to make it real?
So after college, I was in my early 20s. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I'm originally from Venezuela. So, this is before Y Combinator, before seed investors, before any of the infrastructure. So I was thinking, okay, how do I go start a company? And I thought going to graduate school could be a good launch pad, because that puts me in the US. It gives me, the legal ability to work. So I went to Stanford, and I was there going like, okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm a techie by background. I have a math and computer science background. So I was looking at technology related companies. And then I saw the web in 93. And I was very fortunate, the right place at the right time. And brainstorming with some friends, we thought, wait a minute, somebody's going to they will use this for marketing, because back then there were literally no marketing going on, but we could sort of see a little bit of the way it was going to go. We said, they're going to use it for marketing. Somebody's going to have to analyze traffic, and there were no such companies. So I said, let me give that a try. And the challenge back then, interesting enough, we're talking by this point, 94, people did not believe in the web as the future. I mean, I went to Kleiner Perkins, to some of the top VCs, which I have met through Stanford. And one of them tried to convince me that I should stick to AOL. The future was AOL. One of them tried to convince me that it was interactive TV. So our challenge back then was getting people to believe in the web. But by 95, things had taken off. And then, we just grew from there.
Was it more a project on the side then?
No. For me, I finished my MBA. I mean, I started while I was still at school. And then I said, as a foreigner, you get a 1-year practical training visa, which means that you can work for about a year. And so that worked really well for me, because I said, okay, I can. My wife was in graduate school, so I could crash at her place. She was doing a postdoc, so she had a little salary. So I said, okay, for a year, I'm going to try this all out. And if I pull it off, great. Then the company will sponsor me for a visa. And if not, I'll go get a job. And so I was full-time, but definitely getting the initial funding was super hard. I ended up getting someone from Texas, of all places. That was the first person who didn't understand anything, but like, you seem like a good guy, I'll give you some money. The fascinating thing about that time is there were so few of us. So for example, I looked, okay, who can help me with some of the code? And back then there was a Jerry and David Guide to the Web, which was the precursor to Yahoo. And they were grad students at Stanford in the, I think, electrical engineering department. So I reached out to them and said, hey guys, can I buy you lunch and talk about my project, see if you guys want to. So at the time I was trying to get people to work for equity. But Jerry and David are like, no, we're really poor. We need cash. We need $25. I'm like, okay, fine, $25. So that's how I got them to work for me.
Was it just you starting it, or did you consider having a founding team with different roles?
Look, obviously with hindsight, having a team is always ideal. But back then, no, I didn't have anyone who was the natural partner for me. And it was even, there were few people who even, and here, just to take a step back, the world, in particular Silicon Valley, was not as entrepreneurial back then as it is now. Out of the class of my classmates of 350 people, I don't think 10 people went to do startups, including the ones they joined. Most people were joining. So it's not like now, which is like there are entrepreneurship classes and there's startup competitions and you can pair up. It's like I was there, and I think most of my classmates thought I was nuts. It's like, what is Ariel doing? This internet startup is crazy. So there were a few people who did other interesting things, but very few. So yeah, no, it wasn't really an option.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of employees as well, then you were basically early on doing everything, like the coding, the trying to sell the product.
No, I decided early on that I wasn't going to do any of the code because I felt that I wasn't going to do a good job at it. So I recruited there was a point at which I had 10 people, including Jerry and David, working everyone else for equity. I convinced them, different people around the early internet, doing the code. For example, my first programmer was Michael Wolf.
Yes,
back
we
then.
had him on the show as well.
Exactly, I know.
Brilliant guy.
Who is great. Then I later recruited him to Kana Software. And then we had Jeff Lumens, who actually, I think one of them introduced me to the other, I can't remember, also doing some of the work for equity. There was a company called EIT back then, which some people considered like the Bell Labs of the internet, really early days. And they were doing some of the code for equity. So no, I had a virtual team until I raised a little bit of money, which back then I raised $300,000 for about a third of the company. And I was ecstatic. I'm like, my God, they're valuing the company at $1 million. And that allowed me to start hiring people.
Would you, as well, looking back, having started out various companies, having invested in many, would you advise people to early on finance the company, or basically have people work for equity and not needing that much money to raise very early on? Is that a good way, or?
I mean, I don't think there is one right way and one wrong way. I think there are lots of possible ways. It depends on the individual, the conditions, the circumstances, and so on. So I like being scrappy. I like teams that are really committed and can do it for equity, but you cannot always do that. Sometimes you have somebody who's a great team member, but he or she has a family, they have a mortgage, so they need more money, and you have to be conscious of that. I think the priority is get the best possible people, and sometimes you had to adapt to them. Now, I would never get someone who really cares about a lot of money and who doesn't need it, but they want a competitive salary. It's like, oh yeah, Facebook's offering me this much, so unless you do that, that is not, I don't think that makes sense. But sometimes people do need it. But yeah, the scrappier, the better. The beautiful thing now is, my God, with all the infrastructure from Amazon Web Services to all these other resources that are available, you can start lots of different type of companies with very little money. I mean, not everything. Sometimes if you're doing hardware, for example, even that is a lot more efficient than before, but you might need a little more money for that.
It's still hard to do hardware.
Yeah.
Classical joke there. In terms of advice as well, if people pay people for equity, having done that, and so any advice there, how much equity people should give away, especially early on when it's so hard to put a value at the company?
Yeah, it's all over the map. I have this conversation. I look into this all the time, and you have to. I mean, there are a few premises. One is there's a question of is there a point that works for everybody? Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes somebody says, look, unless I can get X, it's not worth my while. And somebody says, look, I can justify that. So then there's no deal, if you will. So the first question is there overlap? If there's overlap, I mean, at a high level, I try to be generous. I try to keep the long term. I think most entrepreneurs, a lot of entrepreneurs are just too obsessed with avoiding dilution. And I think that's because there's all these stories about being diluted to nothing and so on. And sure, that can happen, but the risk of that is much lower than the risk that you don't get the right team and your startup doesn't amount to anything. So I think what I would advise entrepreneurs is focus on the bigger risk. Is the bigger risk that, for example, a related point has to do with competition. What's the bigger risk, that a competitor steals your idea or that you cannot execute? I would argue there are 2 orders of magnitude higher risk that you cannot execute. So be willing to take a little bit of a risk of sharing your idea out there to minimize a bigger risk. Same thing, are you at a bigger risk of diluting yourself to an amount that's too small, or are you a bigger risk of the company not getting anywhere? So I would say, the latter. So yeah, try to be generous and just talk with people about what's reasonable. I'll give you an example. I'm starting a company now where I'm helping a professor at Stanford with a fascinating project. And, you could argue, it could go 80-20 my way, it could go 80-20 his way, we could go 50-50. And I'm like, look, David Spiegel, it's Dr. David Spiegel, co-chair of psychiatry. This is based on all of his research. I'm like, hey, this is about you. So you should have the bulk of the equity. But on the other hand, so he's getting like this big chunk of equity. I had a Stanford student who reached out to me a few months ago saying, I'm doing a startup with a professor, but the investors are worried they're getting too much equity. Said, well, how much are they getting? It's like, well, there's two of them, and between the two of them, they have 10%. I'm like, you kidding me? I mean, this is the work based on them. So yeah, lots of opinions.
Right, and there's always as well
right?
that investors have certain perspectives that say, oh, the cap table is messed up, but then magically it always resolves somehow if people really want to invest in all of that, right?
Yeah, things go well, nothing is a problem, and if things go bad, then it doesn't matter.
How do you think about the team, to building teams? What are the core roles that you would say one should focus on and look for as you want to make it real, as people want to make it real and create a company?
Yeah, again, very personal. I mean, for me, when I think about who am I going to work with, and this applies whether it's a co-founder, whether it's an entrepreneur I'm going to invest in, a fellow board member. For me, the biggest question is, after I spend a bit of time with them, is did I enjoy that? Did I have a good time? And do I want to do more of that? I think life's too short to spend it with people you don't really enjoy with. And in general, good things happen when you're having a good time together. So I think at the top of my list are these people you really want to spend time. And it's happened to me several times that I meet an entrepreneur. I'm like, oh my God, they're going to do a great company, so successful. I don't want to spend time with them. And I go like, oh, well, life's too short. And more so with founders or even with investors. Investors are the most important one to choose carefully, because you can separate from the founder. You can separate from an employee. You cannot separate from an investor. Once you have an investor, you're stuck with the investor. So other than that, I would say complementary. I mean, some obvious thing, complementary skills are great. And not just that she does marketing and I do tech, but also from a personality standpoint. Ideally, you have someone who's maybe very much of a cheerleader, a positive person, and then the other person might be more of a devil's advocate, and they balance each other. And people who are on the same page about what they're trying to do. You don't want to end up in a situation where one of the persons really cares about building a big company and the other person really wants to flip this as quickly as possible and sell it. So make sure everyone's on the same page. Make sure everyone is clear about who owns what. I mean, who's responsible for what, and there's comfort level about that. Yeah, I don't think it's some relatively straightforward thing, I think.
Mm-hmm. And you've seen so vast of opportunities in the internet space. You've seen the early beginnings of Twitter and all of these. How can you decide when you see so many potentially exciting ideas? And we talk about human augmentation as well. And in a second,
Yeah.
How do you decide which projects to go for ultimately? Because I assume there's so many exciting ones and the day only has 24 hours.
No, it's hard. And by the way, most of these very successful projects that I've been fortunate to be close to, it was not obvious at all. And a lot of the people who now look great because, oh yeah, I was an early investor in Twitter. I mean, many of these people basically accidentally ended up there or didn't believe in it or who knows what, or even the founders like of some of the most successful companies in the early days were very skeptical and thinking, really, they're valuing my company this much. What are they thinking? So I think very important is to not pretend you can tell. Now you can tell. Now what can you tell? Whether you can tell if it's something worthwhile doing, if the team is a team that seems good and a good track record, people that you want to be spending time. I can determine if I can help them. So that's really, I start with that. Is this something worthwhile doing? Is this something that it's exciting for me personally? Is this something where I want to spend time with them, where I can help them? And sure, does it look like it could have an impact and be a big company? But honestly, that's the last of the criteria. You don't want to go in there knowing you're going to lose money. But on the other hand, that's such a hard thing. And what I tell particularly entrepreneurs is, look, if you go betting that you're going to make a lot of money and it's going to be really successful, and that doesn't happen, and that's your top priority, then you lose big time. If on the other hand, you go in because you're passionate about a space, you love the people, you think you can learn and contribute, even if the company doesn't do well, you get value out of it, you build network, you learn, you have a good time. And guess what? Most of the successful companies are second time around, third time around. So then you keep keep trying. I mean, that's one of the beauties of Silicon Valley, that people think of Silicon Valley as like, oh, we're such risk takers. But the truth is, because we can do this many times, and this is not just investors, entrepreneurs too. How many entrepreneurs fail and then go at it again and go at it again, eventually they get it right. So you really mitigate your risk with the fact that you can have several tries at it. So yeah, I look at those things, and at the end of the day, I do end up with more projects that look great than projects that I have cycles for. And yeah, I agonize over it. That's the worst part, to differentiate the ones that, yeah, this looks great, but it's a tough one. At the end of the day, you kind of like let your gut drive you, and have to make a tough decision.
Do you believe in something as well, and in a way, doing different projects in parallel to increase the chances of success, to try stuff out in parallel, or should it always be more like a sequential kind of?
No, this is a good point. And actually, my friend Ali Partovi, who was co-founder of LinkExchange, and then very prominent angel investor, he has a great fund now. He gave a talk about this. That actually we were in Vegas, and he made the specific point that I really believe in, that the key is about being sequential. That the key is that we're big believers in Silicon Valley about focus. And so if you try to do 3 things at a time, in all likelihood, you're not going to do a particularly good job at any of them. So particularly I'm looking, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an employee, you take one thing, you give it all your hour. Even if you're a company trying a product or this is not just for people, you give it all out, but you're obviously keeping an eye. Is this making sense? Am I still excited? If that works out, awesome, it takes off. If it doesn't, you move to the next thing. And yeah, I'm a big believer in that info. I mean, I see so many entrepreneurs that are struggling because they're trying to do too much. I rarely see entrepreneurs that are struggling because they're too focused on one thing. Now, it's true, sometimes it's hard to know when you need to move on. And a rule of thumb there is, and I've had this a few times with entrepreneurs who go like, okay, I need to decide whether to give up on this and go do something else or not. And I think a good rule of thumb is like, are you still excited about possible things you can try that you think can move the needle? And if they say yes, then I go like, then then you might want to try them. But sometimes they get to, what? I just no, I can't think of anything I'm excited about. And at that point you go like, yeah, move on. So definitely I'm a focused at one thing at a time philosophy kind of person.
Mm-hmm. You were very early in the very early days of the internet. Yeah, now you talk about human augmentation, which as well know is one of the kind of cutting emerging technologies. You could as well maybe think about virtual reality, augmented reality. How important is it to be very early for you personally in spaces?
Depends for what. I mean, what I enjoy about being early is the impact and the access. So for example, when I started getting interested in human augmentation, I went to a conference, and David Eagleman was talking. He was giving the keynote. He's fascinating researcher working on extra senses and how you can use haptics and feeling as a way to convey information to the brain. But this is early enough that at the end of his talk, I can approach him and say, hey, David, I'm so-and-so, can I buy you lunch? And he's like, yeah, sure, let's go have lunch. And we go have lunch. Now imagine that now you go to an event, and at the end of a talk by Mark Zuckerberg or Mark Andreessen, you want to approach him and say, I want to go buy you lunch. You cannot get within 10 meters of them. So what I enjoy about being early is that you get to interact, and not only that, to help. Because for me, what I've concluded is what gives me the most pleasure is when I can see the impact that I'm having. And by the way, I mean, it's part of it is selfish. It just gives me pleasure to be able to see that, wow, I helped this entrepreneur and look how. And when you're early, few people are there helping. I mean, back in the early days when I was, say, helping the guys at StumbleUpon, I wasn't helping them, nobody was helping them. And so it gave me a lot of pleasure to be able to feel that, yeah, I'm making a difference here. As the industries become more mainstream, people get entrepreneurs, especially the best entrepreneurs who are the ones you want to be working with, get a line of people ready to help them, which is fine. Then I go, awesome, let someone else who can help them. Let me go find someone who needs my help because otherwise no one is helping them. So I like that aspect of being early. I don't think you need to be early to say be successful or make money. I mean, I think if a space is doing well and growing, arguably you're often too early. Like I was really early in the podcasting days. That's how I got involved with Odeo, because Odeo was a podcasting company. This is like 2005. And I'm like, podcasting is going to be huge. And I was like 10 years too early. And at least the podcasting side of things didn't work out. And human augmentation is similar. We're still pretty early. If I was looking at it purely from a financial return standpoint, I might be saying, you know what, let's wait a little bit. But if you're looking at it from a personal impact, sort of like satisfaction standpoint, then yeah, I really enjoy early days of an industry and being there, helping sort it out.
Mm-hmm. The learning as well, no, because it does take some time, I imagine, as well, to learn the core things. It's not just we start today and tomorrow we already know. It's lots of things that contribute to that. As you then have, if we take the example of human augmentation, is there one project where you right now say, this is one of my focal projects where I'm really moving the needle, and maybe if you kind of walk us through that as an example of how to take that project forward?
Yes, it's a little bit, not quite in human augmentation, but it came out of my interest in human augmentation, which was, I referred to it before. I was at the Brain Mind Summit, which is an event that MIT and Stanford organized, and I met David Spiegel. He's the world's expert on hypnotherapy. And when I first heard hypnotherapy, I'm like, hypnotherapy, what is this? This is kind of like, magician thing. But then it turns out that I get to meet David. He's amazing. And he shows me all these clinical trials and research that shows that he uses hypnotherapy to help people with chronic pain, with addiction, with anxiety, with insomnia, you name it. And he says, I've helped thousands of people here at Stanford, but you look like a techie. Can you help me build an app so that a lot of people can benefit from this? And I said, well, this is interesting. Let me think about it. Let me look at it. And long story short, I said, well, I was playing around with Alexa. This is a few years ago. I said, well, let me see if I can code one for you. So I coded one. We chose smoking cessation, smoking addiction as the first one. He did a clinical trial, super good results. Hey, let's do one for chronic pain. So I coded that, and also clinical trial, also good results. So we now have taken this and turned it into a company where we leverage, we call it digital hypnosis or digital self-hypnosis. And the results so far are super encouraging. And most of it is about dealing with a condition. But there is a component about augmentation. And by the way, this is the same with many of my other augmentation projects. If you look at I'm involved with 2 exoskeleton companies. Yes, part of it might be taking you beyond your capabilities, like an e-bike. But some of the early applications are people that might have a deficiency walking or something along those lines. Same with NeoSensory, where we're using haptics to create new senses. But the early applications are about making up for someone that might have a hearing deficiency or might be deaf or even blind. So in a similar way, we're dealing with digital hypnosis as a way to treat conditions. But for example, one of the things that we can do is help you focus and have like super focus by entering into a state of self-hypnosis before you work on or do studies is something that David does. So yes, I'm really involved with that project. And my biggest challenge, surprise, is to put a team together. Because so far, I've recruited a few awesome volunteers. It's great. I have a Stanford freshman, a Stanford sophomore, and a Stanford junior, each one of them volunteering to do something else. And we've had a few people in other places, but we're now trying to get like a proper team and fund the company and so on. But yeah, so that's one project where I'm spending the most time, other than the ones where I'm on the boards, like NeoSensory, or the ones where I'm an active investor, like Realm Robotics or Psionic or HUMM, which uses electricity in your brain to help you with your memory. It's a fascinating project as well.
Mm-hmm. Using an 80-20 rule, what should the founders in these early stage projects focus on?
I'm not sure I follow your question. What do you mean, what should they focus on?
Like what should be the core focus in the very early days? It seems like you're finding an exciting topic, a project to work on with exciting people that you look forward to do this project. And then oftentimes then people get confused. They focus on all kinds of things. We need to build a brand. We need to go to all these founders conferences and whatnot.
I know. Well, again, there's no one right answer. I mean, I've seen success take all sort of different paths. So I think I'll be wrong if I say you should absolutely focus on this or that. It depends on your situation. I mean, I think clearly a product market fit is pretty important early on, meaning you have a product that a certain group of people really benefit from and want to do. So typical error is I see companies try to grow and get additional users before they really nail their product market fit. So the products don't stay, don't talk good about the company. So that is obviously pretty key. The team it's interesting. I mean, some people will tell you, and without a doubt, if you look at the correlation, what's the one factor that correlates the most with success is the team. Well, after luck, but luck is hard to measure. But so clearly the team is super important. But I'm seeing more and more entrepreneurs who outsource a lot of their operations and development and so on. And if you get your product market fit right and you get a few other things right, you can make a lot of progress. Without a permanent team. The flip side is when you have an awesome team, then you can sometimes find new things or really nail it. Sooner or later, you need a team. I would say what else? Focusing too much on funding, in my opinion, is not the right thing, especially if you don't have to. I mean, again, some people say, look, if I don't get a salary, I can't leave my current job. So you got to do what you got to do. But in general, it's better to try to make the most progress you can without having to go the both cycles to funding if you can afford it. Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe focusing on the area, then no, it seems like much of it as well as building an exciting product that addresses a core pain point. It could be really taking things to the next level here as well. Know a lot of elements about going for the use cases where there's people in special need for certain things to first prove it out and then bit by bit going into the mainstream. Do you have a certain way how you said product market fit and focusing and building this product to achieve product market fit? How you'd say, this is normally what I look at a lot to determine product market fit?
I mean, I think a good example of a company that I think did this really well is Strava, where I was on the founding board member and was there up until recently on the board, and super successful company. And we started focusing exclusively on hardcore cyclists. Let's nail it for them. And some of the feedback was like, oh, this is a niche product. But yeah, if you stick to hardcore cyclists, that's going to be a niche. But on the other hand, if you try to go to all possible athletes on day one, you're not going to get it right. So we started with that, and then we said, okay, let's now go to the professionals. So then we move up a little even more hardcore. And then we said, okay, let's go to the ones that are a little less hardcore. And then we brought in them. And you're kind of like grinding and expanding your market. Now, what's really important is to do it to have that belief or that the market can grow. I mean, if you have something that only works, let's say, for kite surfers, I'm a kite surfer, and this is not going to work for anybody else, well, it's going to be hard to build a really big company because there's only so many kite surfers in the world. On the other hand, if you say, look, this can start with kite surfers, but then from there, it can easily go to the surfers. From there, we can take it to the snowboarders and so on and so forth. Then so I'm a big fan of take something, nail it, and then go from there. And for example, at Strava, then we say, okay, now let's go after the runners. Very different market, and it took us years to get there, but eventually, sometimes it also has to do with the product. Run Robotics is a company, an exoskeleton that we believe eventually can be pretty mainstream. But the first product, it's very innovative. It uses compressed air and fabrics to move the exoskeleton. But the early versions of the compressors that you need are noisy and need a little backpack. So you say, okay, what market can we address where this is viable? Say, well, guess what? Skiers are out in the mountain, so the noise is less of an issue. A little backpack is not a big problem when you're skiing. So why don't we go get and build an exoskeleton so it could help people ski? And a few years from now, we'll be able to have a version that's quiet enough and light enough so the elderly people can put it on and use it inside the home. So sometimes you also have to be in line with where is the technology, and if you get too far ahead of yourself, then it doesn't work out.
Mm-hmm. How important is it to actually be able to make sales, let's say in a foreseeable time, maybe half a year, or you'd say that's not too important here?
To make sales, you mean to generate revenue?
Exactly, to generate revenue, no? Because some people as well, I'm like very, let's say they have this excitement around the technology, which could be augmented reality, but it feels like to actually close a sale that could easily be 2-3 years before the first person's buy.
I think it depends on how confident you are that the business model is solid. So I'll give you an example. Let's suppose you are doing a recruiting product that is a big market and people spend a lot of money on it. And then I ask you, how important is it to generate revenue versus to show that this is much better than anything else out there? And I would say, look, forget about the revenues, because if this is really much better than anything else out there, the money's going to follow. I mean, you're in a big space with a lot of people spending money. I mean, you can get it. But if you, on the other hand, think about a social network where you're offering something to consumers who are not used to paying anything, and then you say, well, how important is it to generate revenue? I say, well, what's going to be your business model? Because if that's not clear, then earlier in the process, you probably want to validate that. We were talking earlier about hardware. That's another example where the margins make a huge difference. If you're offering something, take our digital hypnosis service. We offer it online. Our marginal cost is zero. We've recorded David's voice. We offer it. So if this works and people want it, the pricing is not going to determine whether we're successful or not successful as a company, because we're going to have high margins no matter how much we charge. But if you're selling a product, let's take NeoSensory. We're selling a device. Our first device is a bracelet that vibrates based on sound. Well, it costs us an not-trivial amount of money to produce it. So unless people are willing to pay a certain amount of money, we're going to lose money every time we sell it. So then, sooner rather than later, let's make sure people are willing to pay enough so that we have a proper business. So that's what I would say. Case by case, look at it. How important is it? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not.
Mm-hmm. Do you see common mistakes that founders do, where you say definitely watch out for that? Like, what's the number one mistakes that founders do that they shouldn't do, from your perspective, where you feel like, oh my God, there's so many exciting projects, the team is great, and then people keep messing it up here or there? Is there something like that where you like to warn people out there?
Yeah, there's definitely. Let's see what comes to mind. I think a common mistake is to prioritize speed over quality of execution, and that applies in many. I mean, these entrepreneurs often are in a hurry, and there's a lot of pressure. And what I've come to realize after a lot of years is that the reality is you usually have more time than you think. I mean, there are a few exceptions, but they're so rare. I mean, if you talk about a winner takes all, eBay type of situation, but that's point one of the projects. For most projects, I mean, I remember when we were doing iPro, web analytics, and in '96, we're like, if we don't nail this in the next 6 months, the window's gonna go, blah, blah, blah. 3 years later, new companies get started and end up going public in this space. I mean, they just executed well, had another twist. So very common mistake is just focus too much on speed and sacrifice quality. And the number one point where you sacrifice quality is in hiring. I have a saying, which is hire slow and fire fast. Take your time picking the people you hire, because if you get the wrong people, not only it's just so costly, I have seen it ruin so many companies. And the flip side of that, a very common mistake, is the moment you realize someone's not working, move on. And it's the best for them and for you, but so many entrepreneurs, it just emotionally is so hard to deal with it. They just put it off and maybe it'll get better. and 9 times out of 10 it doesn't get better, and you spend all these cycles. So yeah, those are some of the things that come to mind.
In terms of best practices for hiring slow, would it be having them work as consultants in terms of internships, whatever? Is there certain approaches that you like to use?
I mean, if you can work with them on a project beforehand, that's obviously a great thing, because there's nothing like spending time and working together. Often that's not viable. They have another job or they have another offer. I would say there are a couple of things that that have worked well for me in the past that I don't think people do enough. The first one are to do a really thorough job with references. I'm just amazed at how poorly most people do references. People call me, hey, I want to do a reference on so. Yeah. Oh, was he good? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I mean, literally, it's like, and now it's hard to do a good reference because you got to go and say, the people who you're doing the reference with usually want to help them. They know them better. So you really have to dig in there and say, like, look, if I tell you that somebody hypothetically told me that there might have been something this person could have done better, what would you guess that might have been? Well, I guess they could have done blah. Oh, okay. Tell me more about it. So doing thorough reference. Think about someone who's worked with a candidate for years. How can you replicate that in a few interviews? You can't. You just can't. But if you do a good job, you can get a lot of that info. So very thorough references. And then working meetings. We had someone for a very key position at one of the companies I was on the board of, and we were ready to hire him. And then we said, okay, we had some doubts. We said, let's bring this person in and have a working meeting on this strategy and that strategy. And 10 minutes into the meeting, we realized this person is not going to work well with us. We just could see it. So that's something else where, you see it with programmers where they get a programming challenge, but you don't see that as much in more strategic positions. And I do it as when I'm trying to decide whether to invest in a team, and I want to try to do due diligence in a way that's helpful to them, because I don't want. So then I say, okay, guys, what's the challenge you're having? Oh, we're trying to figure out pricing. Okay, let's have a meeting to try to working meeting on pricing. So I get to see them, how they think, how they operate. They get to see me, and hopefully something good comes out of the meeting. So you can do something similar when you're hiring.
That's fantastic advice. Really great to validate people under real circumstances. And so looking out to the future, are you currently, we talked about human augmentation being one space that you're excited about. Anything else that founders should have on their radar?
Look, I would say at least half of the projects that I get involved with are opportunistic based on the people that I've worked in the past. So in this year, in the year 2020, I guess, there's been at least, I usually do 5 or 6 investments per year. And I think at least 3 of them have been people that I worked with in the past, or somebody who I know well who introduces me to someone. So the reason I bring this up is, if you're really passionate about a space, then I think you should go for it. But to go and say, oh, let's go find the space that's going to be the next hot thing, I'm not a big fan of that approach. Again, it could work for some people. Personally, it's more about being opportunistic, about meeting interesting people, networking with interesting people, doing interesting things, and often one thing leads to the other, and then somebody says, oh, wow, you should talk with someone. So that's how some of my best projects have come about, combined with, if you're really into a space, then become an expert. There's nothing like, I have a lot of admiration for entrepreneurs who really know spaces inside out. And you can say, well, if someone's going to succeed in this space, this person is going to succeed in that space. More so than saying, oh my God, crypto is hot, let me go join crypto. To me, that's like, by the time the space is hot, then what's the point? Sure, you could financially do well. Yeah, you join a big company, but that's not necessarily how you're going to stand out and have the most personal satisfaction.
Wonderful. I think great points to really look inside and see authentically what is that you are virtually interested in, that you want to create as an entrepreneur. Final advice for entrepreneurs who want to make it real?
Final advice. I struggle with umbrella advice, but
Right, because it's so, that's as well definitely something that I learned here in the podcast. No, you have to, there's not one fits at all. You really have to understand your personal situation, the team.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll just say one thing. This touches a little bit on something we were discussing before about risk, which is that I don't think entrepreneurship is as risky as I think most people believe, because again, especially, I mean, if you are someone who's competent, who knows the space, who's driven, and you join a project and it doesn't work out, you're not going to be out of a job. I mean, there's going to be other opportunities for you. So sometimes I get this conversation where, like, let's say I'm trying to hire someone for a company, and they're like arguing maybe that they should have more equity or more cash because of the risk. And I'm like, what risk? I mean, like, if we go under a year from now, you know, if you're not confident you're going to get a job, then I'm not sure I want to hire you. So keep that in mind, that you can get fired from big companies go on. So it's not necessarily as risky, and that yeah, you should see it more as a iterative process where you rarely nail it at the first time, you rarely get it right. You don't see, I mean, so many of the most success, you take your pick of companies that have done really well, from Twitter to Slack, I mean, even Uber. I mean, they started in different places, and you know, one thing led to the other, and some of the people that have done the best just happen to be at the right time and the right place, or happen to do something really good that led someone else to give them the opportunity. So just focus on that. Here's the other thing I would say: focus on building good karma. I mean, focus on trying to be nice to people, try to help people. Tell you, my number one source of deals are the people who have turned down, because I'm always trying to be nice, be helpful. So then I'm like, look, I'm trying to help you, but this is not for me. And then when they do the next project, they reach out, hey, what about this one? Or when their friend does, hey, you should talk to Ariel. And you're always going to have more people you interact with whom you cannot do something than those with whom you can. So that's a bigger universe to build your karma, if you will.
Wonderful. Well, great advice for people that want to make it real as well. Really focus on karma and on what's inside you, the true interest that you have. Ariel, thanks so much for taking the time, and all the best going forward.
Pleasure. Yeah. Good luck with the rest of the podcast, and thanks for having me.